Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. I'm Delphine Adenau-Ousu, the Executive Director of UCAN, the EU Chamber of Commerce in Canada. Welcome to this webinar, during which we will talk about space collaboration between the EU and Canada. If you are new here at the EU Chamber of Commerce in Canada, we promote and educate on CETA through webinars and guides, and our second pillar of activity is also to advocate on behalf of EU companies on both sides of the Atlantic. Before we dig into today's topic, which is obviously space collaboration between the EU and Canada, I would like to inform you that we will have a Q&A session at the end of the discussion, at the end of the webinar. Please take all your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. First, we will have representatives of space industry in Canada and in the EU to give us their view on the sector, and then we will have businesses sharing what does this collaboration between EU and Canada means at their own level. So first, I would like to invite Mike Muller, President and CEO at Aerospace Industries Association of Canada, AIAC, to give us his speech. Over to you, Mike.
Well, thank you, Delphine, for that kind introduction. And I must say the work you have done to put this together. Good morning, everyone. And it's a real pleasure to be here on behalf of the Aerospace Industries Association of Canada. And our members represent over 95% of aerospace activity in Canada, spanning the civil, defense, and space sectors. And we have a vibrant space committee that is doing tremendous work on a comprehensive roadmap to maximize Canada's hard-won leadership in space. And in fact, today's moderator, Aaron Spans from ABB, chairs our space committee, and we're incredibly grateful for his dedication and hard work. And I'd encourage anyone who would like further information about the work being done by Aaron and our space committee to get in touch. We'd love to have a discussion. And it's great to see other familiar faces here. I see Des from Secor, Chris from Telus, Daniel from Airbus, all valued members of AIC, and all tremendous companies who we work closely with as we advocate on behalf of this industry. And we need to keep telling our story. We need to ensure those making the policies that directly affect us understand just how important this industry is. And aerospace has been a driving contributor to Canadian prosperity for decades, providing over 200,000 jobs and over 22 billion annually to our nation's economy. It's a world leader. In fact, 2019, Canada's space industry produced revenues of 5.5 billion and contributed 2.5 billion to our nation's GDP. And Canada has always been a pioneer in space. And now with the unbelievable opportunities ahead, we must ensure our companies and our talent are positioned for their share of the trillion-dollar marketplace that is being projected. And it's a very exciting time in terms of the advancements that we're seeing. Space technology and the global space economy is growing at an unprecedented rate. The possibilities for the future are limitless. Every day, space-enabled technology plays an even more critical role in our daily lives. Doing things in space is no longer a value-added activity. In fact, more and more, there's an absolute reliance on space-enabled services, and it cannot be overstated that space systems and technologies benefit everyone, all of society, and space-based systems provide the persistence and continuity of service that no other system offers. Whether it's connecting us via satellite communications, observation technology for monitoring and protecting our environment, protecting our sovereignty, safety and security, or responding to disasters. This is all interconnected with our advancements and technologies in the space sector. And it's interconnected in terms of our collaboration with other nations, which is why events like this one are so important. Canada and the European Union have been collaborating on space for about 50 years now. Through our strong ties with the cooperation agreement between the European Space Agency and the Canadian Space Agency, we've seen tremendous growth and innovation over the years. There's a real strength to our relations. And that includes the work being done through the Canadian-European Union Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement, or CETA as we like to say, which entered into force just over a little over a year ago. And collaboration and cooperation is key. The new paradigms include data sharing, digitalization, artificial intelligence, high-speed quantum computing, and rapid anytime, anywhere access to information are critical drivers of today's economies, and Canada and Europe excel here. Our industries, space agencies, academic institutions thrive and flourish when there is free and open exchange of ideas, and unfettered access to each other's markets. I'll wrap things up with this. With a decades-long history of achievement, Canada's leadership in space has become a true source of pride for Canadians, and we're very excited about the future and by leveraging all the opportunities, including the work of our vibrant Space Committee and all space stakeholders, will ensure Canada continues to contribute to the society-wide benefits of space technology, research, and innovation at home and globally. We look forward to working with all of you to achieve this goal. And thank you once again for the invitation to be here today. And I look forward to the discussions to come. Thanks, Delphine. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Mike. So now I will call your counterpart, Olivier Lemaitre, Secretary General at Eurospace, to give us some introduction words. Over to you, Olivier.
Thank you very much, Delphine. Thank you for inviting us today. So as you mentioned, indeed, I'm representing Eurospace, Eurospace being the association of the space, European space sector. We represent roughly 90, or our members actually represent roughly 90% of the turnover and a bit more than 75% of the workforce in space in Europe. So in order not to take too long, I agree with everything that Mike mentioned from a, I would say, political point of view about the importance of space. Let me perhaps give you a short briefing about the European space sector in general, with a few figures, and I promise you just a very limited numbers of figures. Just to have an understanding of what the European space sector is. Actually, it's a sector that weighs in final sales a bit more than 7.5 billion euro. In 2020, and 2020 was not a good year. We had it was the year of the first year of the COVID crisis. So usually we are more around 8.5 billion euro a year. In terms of a workforce, we have an employment of 50,000 full-time equivalents, and with interesting trends in recent years. With quite important growth in mid-sized players in Europe, but in particular a significant growth in actually newer and smaller players, which do not contribute yet to sales in a significant way, but still we see this steady growth in employment in the European space sector, and in particular in the newer and smaller sector. In terms of impact in the space sector globally, I think it's interesting to know that the European space sector provides roughly 15% of the worldwide spacecraft in terms of production, which is not bad. But it's even better when you know that those 15% of the worldwide spacecraft production is actually the result of a workforce that only weighs 4% of the global workforce in space. So we are actually quite competitive in Europe, and it's a particularity of the European space sector. It's actually most or a lot of this activity of this production of spacecraft is linked to the commercial markets, which are actually, as everybody knows, quite volatile and quite cyclical. So it's a challenge for the European space industry to depend so much in the order of 40% of our turnover. We depend on the commercial markets. It's a challenge, but on the other hand, this has somehow forced or resulted in a European space sector that is quite competitive. Then looking at opportunities of our collaboration, the collaboration between ESA, between Europe and Canada. I think there are many, and we already in the European space sector, we are used to collaborate with Canadian industries in the frame of ESA, where we have Canada as collaborating countries since 40 years now, roughly. But at more European, meaning EU side, I think there are indeed opportunities related to common challenges. The environment, the climate, also the Arctic, that is of growing importance at European level, but as it was mentioned before, also in terms of connectivity. And looking specifically at the connectivity, we all know in the sector that in the commercial part, at least, of the space activity and the space collaboration between Europe and Canada, there is this key collaboration with Telesat, being the fourth operator worldwide, and Telesat having chosen a European company as prime for the Lightspeed constellation. And this collaboration in space, in the field of connectivity, is of course not only important for the European industry, it's important for the employment in space in Europe. It will represent something like 1,500 jobs in Europe in space, which is very important. But it's also a demonstrator worldwide of the competitiveness of the European space sector when it comes to constellation. And let me remind everybody that at the exception of the Starlink constellation, all other operational constellations in the world are being manufactured by European manufacturers. So it's very important, and this contract with Telesat is of course very important for industry, with positive impact not only in the country of the prime contractor, but also in the whole supply chain in at least 5 or 6 other countries in Europe. I think it's also important because this Lightspeed constellation might also be a very interesting alternative to the US constellation being deployed for the moment. So we see that we have already collaboration at institutional level, but also at commercial and industrial level. But perhaps if I have still 1 minute, let me insist, 1 minute, sorry. Let me insist, but I can come back to that later if needed, about the importance when we talk about collaboration within Canada, between Canada and Europe, to insist towards our institutional counterpart to have the right institutional framework, especially now at EU level, where issues such as non-dependence and strategic autonomy are of growing political concern. I cannot insist enough on the necessity to have a strong agreement between Canada and EU in order for us to work together. So thank you very much, and happy to take questions furthermore. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivier. Yeah, no, time is very limited. We have 1 hour to dig into this topic. So actually, we will move on to the next stage, which is calling Aaron Spence, Business Development Manager, Space Defense Systems at ABB. And as Mike mentioned, he's also the chair of the Space Committee at IAC. And I will call all the business representatives to also come on camera and microphone so we can have the business discussion. Over to you, Aaron.
Great, thank you very much, Delphine. So welcome everybody on this call. We have a unique opportunity to have a variety of different Canadian industry players engaged in this panel discussion. We have companies that are both small and large. We have companies that are firmly established within the Canadian space industry, as well as companies that are looking to get more of a foothold within the Canadian space industry. We also have companies that are involved more on the data side of things, as well as companies that are involved in hardware development. So hopefully this will be able to represent a wide swath of perspectives as we look at collaboration with the EU. And what we're going to be asking each of the companies to do is briefly discuss their engagement with EU or potential engagement with EU, some of the challenges their own company has seen, successes, as well as their insights on the future. And each company will also be asked a topic to hopefully address that may be particularly pertinent for their individual cases. So what I'm going to end up doing, so everyone is aware, we'll have each company introduce themselves. And then after each company has done that, we'll go through and we'll start on 5-minute discussion topics where each company member is going to take on the topic itself. And as I had mentioned before, just briefly describe their engagement with EU and collaboration with EU, their insights on that. Panelists will have an opportunity to provide additional comments on that, and then we'll move on to the next topic. And as Delphine had mentioned, if there are questions, please feel free to write them down in the Q&A button that you'll see at the bottom of your Zoom panel, and we'll address those. There'll be about 10 minutes at the end of the discussions to address some of the Q&As. So without further ado, we'll jump into some of the discussions, and we'll just go through alphabetical order on the companies here. So that places Mr. Dan Chilton from Airbus first. Dan, over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Daniel Chilton. I'm Business Development Director for Airbus Canada when it comes to space. And thank you very much for having me at this panel. As a European by birth and a Canadian by choice, it's really an honor to be part of this. I joined Airbus a few months ago, and I'm busy learning, getting to know my 130,000 new colleagues. So bear with me as I get up to speed. As you know, Airbus is active in all the domains of space that you can think of, ranging from space exploration to Earth observation, to launchers, to satellites, to data, you name it. We're active across the world, with of course an emphasis in Europe and still a modest presence in Canada, where we're busy on finding ways to grow that. And we're working with a lot of partners in Canada, both on programs where we provide components and subsystems, or acquire and purchase components and subsystems from Canadian partners. And we work on lots of mission studies and early concepts with our Canadian friends. So I'll stop there. There's a lot of ground to work together on.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, over to Mr. Des Powers from Secor.
Yes, hello. My name is Des Power. I'm Vice President of Remote Sensing here at Secor. We're a small company, relatively speaking, but large in the Earth observation area. We've got just less than 100 employees. We have 3 offices. Our largest one is here in St. John's, Newfoundland, Labrador. We have an office in Ottawa and a small business development office in Halifax. We're like a mini prime. I like to call ourselves that in the sense that we're big enough that we can prime hardware developments, the software development projects, but we generally try to align ourselves with some of the larger companies in space development projects. We do things like Earth observation services. We do quite a lot of research on Earth observation applications, and we build hardware. One of our biggest projects right now is with Airbus and ESA, building a transponder for the biomass satellite that'll be launched sometime next year. Very capable company, love to work both in Canada and in Europe. And yes, it's certainly a challenge to work in Europe because of the distances, but we're actually ideally positioned here on the East Coast to allow us to work both on the West Coast of Canada and also in Europe.
Great, thank you very much, Des. Okay, we'll jump over to Wade Larson over at Earth Daily Analytics.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Earth Daily Analytics is headquartered in Vancouver, but we've got operations in Minneapolis and in Toulouse. We are focused almost exclusively on the development of a constellation, which we call the Earth Daily Satellite Constellation, 10 satellites, which will be launching at the end of next year, that will image the entire planet, basically 150 million square kilometers of land every single day in 22 spectral bands. And at the heart of the growing revolution that we are witnessing, which sees the merger of huge amounts of satellite data with very, very sophisticated cloud computing capabilities, and AI and downstream exploitation of that data for addressing some of the really, really big challenges that the world faces, everything from food security to climate change monitoring to disaster management and on and on and on. And so what we're really at the heart of is this transformation of space, which up until now has largely been, as we know, a government-led, public sector initiated sector, to one that now is increasingly led by the private sector, led by demand in the downstream, and more taking the human in that value chain from where they've always been, which is in the midstream in terms of the actual exploitation and use of the data, and moving them further to the downstream, and allowing a lot of that generation of AI and so forth to be machine to machine. And I think that represents an extremely important and frankly quite exciting opportunity for people looking to address some of the really big challenges that the planet faces right now.
All right, thank you very much, Wade. Okay, next up, I'd like to ask Miguel Primo to introduce his DSAT.
Okay, thank you very much, Aaron. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Miguel Garcia Primo. I am the Chief Executive Officer of ISDESAT. ISDESAT is a Spanish company. It's a satellite operator and service provider, mainly for three main fields of activities. The first one is GovSatcom. So we have 2 geostationary governmental satellites for communication. And here we work only for government. We cover with these 2 satellites 2/3 of the Earth. And we cover from Denver, US to Singapore. And the satellites are called SpaceSat and Exterior. And we are also developing now the SpaceSat next generation with more fancy issues like a V-array antenna with 18 spot beams that can be moved anywhere electronically and so on. We have another field that is Earth observation. We have a synthetic aperture radar in X-band, a very high resolution. It's a satellite called PATH, up to 25 centimeter resolution. And we work here for government and commercial. And also we are active in maritime traffic monitoring through this satellite IIS through Exacer. That is a Canadian company that we used to be shareholder of them. They are in Cambridge, Ontario, and they are also dealing with government and commercial customer. And I think I can stop here my presentation, initial presentation of the company. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Miguel. Okay, over to Chris Pogue at Telus, please.
Morning, folks. Good morning, Aaron. Thank you for that. Chris Pogue, I'm the President and CEO of Telus Canada. We have operations across Canada from sea to sea. About 2,300 people in Canada working in a range of activities from digital identity and security, urban transportation, the avionics sector, as well as defense. 2 themes came to mind, I guess, as we were talking about opening. And we also have Telus Space, which is now increasingly engaging in the Canadian sector, principally around Lightspeed, as Olivier commented, the Lightspeed program, which represents another sort of telecom constellation in that European capability that's being delivered into that Canadian program. Additionally, 50% of the ISS has come from the Telus Space team. They do have sort of 2 reinforcing vectors, one around, I would call it satellite communication infrastructure, and one around Earth observation systems, similar to some of the other colleagues who spoke on here in terms of Earth observation satellite systems. Another thing that's interesting about Telus Space is the investment made by Telus in R&D programs like AI and some of that activity, which we'll probably talk about a little bit more, but as well as investment in sort of the new space economy with companies like North Star and Leo Stella, in terms of looking at how the new space will impact the market. I think Wade's comment about this tipping point between commercial demand and government-run programs is an interesting one to follow up on for sure. Within the Canadian context, we've been operating for more than 50 years in Canada. A lot of programs with the CSA, particularly around remote health and astronaut health, as well as programs associated with the MEOSAR program. I'm looking forward to the rest of the dialogue because I think the challenge here is to find ways to ensure we grow the space ecosystem in Canada rather than fight over the space ecosystem in Canada. So I'm looking forward to the dialogue. Thank you, Aaron, for the opportunity to talk.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Okay, so that is the introductions to all the companies we have on our panel discussions, and we'll now ask each company to go in and just provide their thoughts on EU collaboration with Canada, their own company's reflection, as well as companies that may be of a similar nature to them as well. Wade, I'd like to start off with you with Earth Daily Analytics, and perhaps ask for your reflections on this. And as touched on in your introductory comments, as well as Olivier mentioning this in his remarks, that commercial companies is playing a much larger role in this, and how this may be changing the nature of EU collaboration and how to approach that.
Sure, thanks, Aaron. Yeah, we've got a few really profound touch points with Europe. The first is that we have a division in Toulouse called Earth Daily Agro, but it used to be called Geosys, and they've been around for 30 years. And they are a world leader in the use of satellite imagery for value-added or analytics services in the ag space, specifically the digital ag space. And it's not a B2C company, it's a B2B company. It's helping all of the inputs into farming, whether it's from managing pesticide growth or the use of other kinds of products to help minimize the environmental impact of different inputs in order to maximize food production. And they have been really world leaders in that. A second touch point is that in building out our satellite constellation, the Earth Daily Satellite Constellation, which is launching at the end of 2023, we're actually using Airbus buses. These are the OneWeb Aero buses built in both Toulouse and in Florida, coming through us through Loft Aerospace in Colorado, but taking advantage of these very powerful mass-produced comms birds that Airbus has been building for the OneWeb constellation, and repurposing them very nicely for our Earth observation satellites, and taking advantage of the scalability that those systems provide is very interesting and a great use of a capability. And the third I would like to mention is what we're doing in Ukraine right now. Our agricultural division has been active in Ukraine, supporting the Ukrainian agricultural sector for well over a decade, and we have really deep understanding of Ukrainian agricultural production. And since the war has broken up, we have organized basically a cooperative, which we call the Support Ukrainian Farmers Coalition, of over 70 organizations, large, small, private, public, nonprofit, on 6 different continents, to bring on a voluntary basis free seed, free fertilizer, and in our case, free analytics to support Ukrainian farmers and Ukrainian farming coalitions in country on the ground, to try and get through what's going to be a very difficult problem for the Ukrainian people to feed themselves in this coming year, but also to try and support their capacity to export, and the removal of Ukrainian food from the world market, as well coupled, of course, with removal of Russian nitrogen from the world market, is going to have a very severe impact downstream. And you're already seeing in places like Africa that the extreme rise in commodities prices is going to cause very severe hardship in the coming 6, 12, 18 months. So there are a number of touch points that we have with Europe, deep touch points. But I would say what's particularly interesting is the extent to which these are really being led by the private sector, certainly with support of the public sector, but the initiative and the drive and the energy is coming from the commercial sector. And in some ways, I think this partnership between public and private really speaks to the maturation of space and the emergence of the space sector in its own right as an important pillar in the private sector economy, and its ability to impact people's lives and the economy much more widely. In some ways, if you look at what the world's response to COVID was, in some ways it's really the perfect synopsis of public and private sector working together. It took the public sector to set the targets, to set the goals, to in some ways create the demand for the vaccines. But it took the private sector, in terms of the innovation, the sourcing of goods across many countries and continents, and of course, ultimately the scalability to produce billions and billions of vaccines, brand new, invented overnight, and to distribute those around the world. And frankly, it is only the private sector that could have done that. Yes, the public sector had to provide the context and the framework within it, but it was the private sector unleashed that could create these vaccines and distribute them at a scale that the world has never before seen. And so that, I think, speaks to the power of what can happen. And in space, it really will take something similar in terms of the use of satellite data in conjunction with AI that allows us to address some of these major challenges that the planet is facing: food security, climate change, and so forth. It will take the innovation and drive and energy of the private sector to produce the solutions that the planet needs.
Aaron, I think you are muted. Sorry.
Thank you, Delphine. So I'd just like to open this up to the panelists as well to touch on any thoughts on commercialization and how that may affect collaboration with the EU.
Maybe, Aaron, if I can, I mean, I think Wade's point, one of the interesting challenges, Wade, maybe you can speak to, is the dynamic as we move towards more commercial driven market opportunity, which I think your phrase, the maturation of the market's a great one. I think that's logically what we've seen in other sectors as well. Is one of the things I'm always worried about is how do you avoid the boom and bust of the large scale government space programs that have this sort of massive growth phase, deliver wonderful things, and they have in Canada, and Canadian companies have been involved in those. And then there's kind of this almost hollowing out until the next large program. How do you see leveraging that within the commercial sector to not have that hollow out occur post a large program?
Well, I think it's really about the public sector moving away from only investing in upstream, capital phase development, and moving increasingly into buying services in the downstream, because that allows industry to do long-term planning and avoid the sort of mountain valley boom bust production. If industry can take a long view, decade-long view of delivering a space system or space infrastructure derived services to the public sector, and the public sector doesn't need to even form the majority of the market demand. Even a small minority is fine, but as long as it provides long-term sustainable visibility to that demand, the private sector can then invest and build out accordingly. I think one of the perhaps weaknesses of Canadian space policy to date has been an overemphasis on upstream spending and an underdeveloped downstream services spending when it comes to public sector investment in space. And I think that balance probably needs to be tipped better. I would say in general, I think Europe does a better job of this, of balancing upstream and downstream. And I think perhaps that has to do with the nature of the partnership between ESA, which generally tends to be upstream, but I think has a good downstream investment as well. And then, of course, the European Commission, which entirely is downstream. And I think that partnership works quite well. So I think there's probably some things there that Canada could learn from.
Great. Thank you very much, Wade. I'd like to move on to the next topic of discussion, and I'll call on Miguel at his set to touch on his experience in EU-Canadian collaboration. Miguel, it's a unique experience on the panel group where you're dealing in the other direction on the Atlantic for the most part, as well as dealing with a lot of data issues, and wondering if you see an issue in terms of challenges or ease of data sharing as you build your opportunities across the Atlantic. Your thoughts?
Yeah, okay, Aaron, thank you very much for the question. Yes, I think it's a good time to talk about downstream. I think Wade was talking about that. We are purely in the downstream as a satellite operator and service provider. And as a matter of fact, what we did was a collaboration in Canada, being shareholder of a company in Cambridge, Ontario called ESA. We are shareholder from 2010. Maybe this is a very small example, but I think it's good also to talk about that. So we co-invested at that time with a Canadian company called Condev, and we created ESA. at that time, and we were joined together till 2016, when through a spin-out process of Conde shareholders, the company was carried out at the Toronto Stock Exchange, and at that time, ESA was holding 27% of the shares of the company, being the biggest shareholder at that time. So the collaboration is mainly for data. So we had the data of this executor IAS by satellite constellation, providing global maritime traffic monitoring data in real time with global coverage with almost zero latency. And we provided that services and that data all over the world, and especially in the EU as well. We also make that fusion with our synthetic aperture radar system, and we were able to do things like vessel detection, oil spill detection, using artificial intelligence and machine learning and deep learning and so on, making a lot of progress automatically. We're providing that services to many European Union agencies, and also some agencies from the member states in Europe. Of course, these services are provided globally, so many countries in the world, probably more than 90, are already using that data. And probably this is a good example of success, because I think in the IS by satellite probably is the leader data provider today at this company. The company recently has been acquired by Spire, and today is called Spire Maritime. But we still collaborate with them in all the commercial approach, all the technical approach to do this kind of fusion. Regarding hardware, it's important also to mention that in our first synthetic aperture radar satellite called PATH, we integrated a last generation IAS payload, and was the first satellite that has, with full coherence in timing, because it was in the same platform, IAS payload and a synthetic aperture radar, that we can do the fusion with a pure coherence, because it was done in the same time. Another example of collaboration with Europe through ExaCare is a satellite that from ExaCare we did with the European Space Agency. It's called ExactView 10, and was done through Look Space also in Europe. So this is the example for IAS by satellite for maritime monitoring. I have a couple of more examples in hardware. We are building right now our next generation space geostationary government communication satellite. We have a prime contractor in Europe, that is Airbus Defence and Space System, and we have several subcontractors in the Canadian companies. But significantly, we have NDA and Honeywell, this last in Cambridge, Ontario, that was the former Conde. And very significant pieces of the satellite are done in Canada, like for instance, the UHF antennas that has been done by NDA in their factory they have in Ottawa. So it's several examples of collaboration. We expect to follow on this direction, and I believe this is an important challenges. Sharing data globally, and like can be done from maritime monitoring through IAS and through synthetic aperture radar.
Okay, thank you, Miguel. So open to the panelists if there's any additional thoughts, particularly on issues like data sharing or IP regulation and such. If there's any comment on those types of issues in dealing with you, either from Miguel or the other panelists.
Well, maybe I can take a crack at this, and it builds a little bit also on what Wade said earlier today. With the vaccines, there's a lot of regulation in space. Laws, and governments want to have some level of control over technology and so on. And as the public sector moves more from a customer to an enabler, it's important that the regulatory aspects keep pace with the speed of the programs and of the commercial endeavors. And that's what we saw in the vaccines, where the whole approval cycle was basically turned upside down to go from a 5-year process to a couple of months, and it could be done. I think in the space world, the public sector is struggling to keep up with all the commercial initiatives, and both in Canada and in Europe, the challenge is to make sure that that we're not missing out on commercial opportunities because there's constraints that we cannot control, hindering us to achieve what we potentially can achieve together.
Thank you for your thoughts, Dan. Yeah, I'd like to next switch over to Chris Pogue over at Telus and ask Chris on Telus's overview of collaboration with you. And Chris, I was also hoping you might be able to touch on the fact that Telus is a firmly established company across Canada, and your relationship with Telus Alenia over in Europe is a unique situation, and how that relationship may help Telus Canada grow in the space industry as a whole.
Let's start with the last part because that's the part I'll remember. I think generally it's a little bit like the boom and bust piece, to be honest with you. I think it's a great opportunity because of a large scale program like Lightspeed. It draws heat and light literally to a problem. And because of that scale and the size of that program and Canada's investment in that program, we create an opportunity for a long-term sustainable industrial sector in Canada if we do it right. We create the potential for boom and bust if we don't do it right. And by right, I mean, it's not just singularly that it's a space program, but the AI others have spoken to, that can be applied to space, but it can also be applied to the auto sector. It can be applied to lots of different healthcare sector. So you imagine the kind of places where Canada has natural strengths and has already invested in both capability, innovation, and innovation infrastructure. Think of the superclusters around AI we have all across Canada because Telus works with many of those. That kind of infrastructure for innovation is able to be leveraged not to just deliver to that space program, to create sustainable capability that can reach a global market through export potential with these same European companies, Telus being an example, that operate in 70 countries around the world. So you have an export path. To me, there's something to that. And when I think about the sort of lead-in part of your question, I think about some of the things that companies can do. Personally, since I've been at Telus, for example, by virtue of personal relationship with Kepler Space in Canada, they were connected to Telus Alenia on an ESA program, and now the teams are collaborating very effectively, and Kepler's innovation will become part of that solution. That's pretty ad hoc, that's pretty random. So how do we create sort of strategic structural tools that make that happen? So in AI, Telus has invested in AI at Centec. We have over 450 companies over the past 3 years that have applied to join that AI accelerator. And those companies then become part of either Telus's ecosystem or somebody else's. And it doesn't really matter. The accelerator kind of works. Now, these are global companies, or rather we draw from global startups. We recently started the Telus Synergy program, which is really Canadian-centric around Canadian small and medium-sized businesses that we actually lend and share IP with so that they can accelerate their development, reach more customers faster, and ideally join us in a global export market where their capability is differentiating. That same model builds an ecosystem. And to me, that's the way in which European countries and Canadian companies can interact in unique and powerful ways. And it works both ways. Kepler will bring to Telus Alenia Space on that ESA program excellent capability that will make a difference in that program. And that's what really drives it. And then I think about the challenge we face and the unique perspective that space offers. And I'll come to Daniel's point about vaccine. If I just give you 30 seconds, it might make sense, but give me 30 seconds. Why do we all come together around vaccines and solve it in months, what used to take years? Why were companies sharing IP? Because we all shared from the benefit of successful outcomes. That was how it worked. We were all going to be healthier. We were all going to save lives. Then you look at climate change and the number of variables in climate change that can be measured from space. and you say that is a loon shot unifying concept that we should rally around. And you take the Arctic and Canada, and I flew over the Arctic when I was in the Air Force, and the impact climate change is having, and I think, what better country to take on that challenge? Cause infrastructure that brings the multiple Earth option data tools together, integrates them in unique ways so that we're using different types of sensors to see things we might not otherwise see. Canadian companies like GHGSat that are doing this kind of work, it kind of comes together in this merged infrastructure of data. The AI is superimposed upon it, and maybe we solve some of those climate challenges. That's like vaccine for the world as we kind of head forward. I hope that made sense. I gave it a go. Whoops, Aaron, I think I can't hear you. Yeah. I'm sure you're saying good things.
I did it again. Jeepers creepers. All right. So what I would open it up to the panelists for is following on Chris's comments here about, just how do we generate that momentum to not compete with European companies, but to help each other grow, particularly on the Canadian side of things. Any comments on that or thoughts on that from the panelists?
Maybe one thought there, and that is, as a small company, you should not be afraid to partner, not be afraid to put yourself out there. It takes quite a long time to establish the level of trust with companies for larger projects. And as a small Canadian company, we many years ago, we had to take the chance to put ourselves out there on a variety of projects. I'm putting together one project right now, a response to an RFP with a company that I've never worked with before, basing it on reputation. So you just got to take that chance. Make sure that you do your homework. We do our homework by consulting with our CSA delegates and the people, the network that we've established in Europe through both ESA and EU projects.
Aaron, can I just follow up on Desmond's comment, because I think it's really a key idea. This idea of trust, right? Like, we are living in a world where there's a lot of challenges on trust. When we started the Synergy program, which was an outreach program of small and medium-sized businesses, I asked the first two candidates that are now working with us, like, how did you trust us? And they said something to me that really struck me. They said, it was just simple things. You guys returned emails, you returned phone calls, we got on calls together, and there was open and transparent dialogue. It was little tiny things that created trust. I thought it would be something big, like we had some negotiation and IP was protected. It was little simple things that are just human things. And I was struck by that, by the power of that. So I guess that's what you're probably facing, Desmond, I suspect.
Well, that's a good, in fact, with regards to trust, in responding to certain tenders, you've got to establish that trust really quickly. There's no time to dilly-dally on establishing a consortium to respond to a tender, whether that's a tender for Airbus, a tender for Telus, or for ESA, or for CSA. You've got to establish that trust very fast. And we have seen you snooze, you lose if in responding to certain tenders. If you don't establish the partnership quickly, other people will establish it, and you're left out in the cold.
Okay, thank you for those comments. And Des, that provides, I'm making sure I'm not on mute. Yes, that provides a good segue into the comment that I was hoping you'd be able to touch on as well during your comments on this. Please talk about your EU Canadian collaboration thoughts in general, but also perhaps touch on how CCOR generates collaborative opportunities with the EU. How do you look to the EU to try and find collaborative opportunities, and is there a challenge, or are there areas there to improve on?
That's in fact a great segue into this comment, because I was fortunate enough back in 1992 to get involved in perhaps one of CCOR's very first space endeavors with the European Space Agency. So that's how long I've been with the company, quite some time. So I know a lot of the corporate history and how it's evolved through the years, how our collaborations have evolved. We had an established network in our oil and gas sector. We were doing nothing in space. We're doing a lot of remote sensing, but nothing in space. So we levered off of our existing network. We had a network in Europe because of our oil and gas work. And as a consequence of that, we were able to put together a consortium to respond to an ESA proposal that was successful, surprisingly successful for a bunch of companies that knew nothing about space. And I think that's what caught ESA's eye. Here's a group of companies who knew nothing in space who could probably shake things up in terms of space technology transfer, which is what the project was. As a Canadian company, we find it exceedingly difficult to establish new networks. So we constantly rely on existing ones and lever off of that. It's expensive for us to attend a lot of these EC and ESA functions. We end up being very strategic in ones that we pick. For instance, the Living Planet Symposium, which has grown tremendously over the years, we're participating in that one. We'll probably participate in the ESA Industry Days in the fall. We pick the ones that we know work for us. We have companies there that we know, and we try to meet new companies as we're there, and we use those opportunities to establish new potential for new collaborations. The collaborations are key. You cannot put a proposal into an ESA or an EC project without having a cluster of companies. It just doesn't work. We've tried it. It doesn't work. And like I said, it's expensive for us. That's probably the and that's why I said don't be afraid to collaborate. The other thing that I found was very helpful is relying on the resources of your national delegates to help you out. We were fortunate to be early in the game for the Copernicus program, which was GMES back in the early 2000s. We had an extraordinary help from our Canadian Space Agency, who we'd had established a good relationship with because of various Canadian projects. And we put together a consortium of Canadian European companies to respond to the opportunity. It was key. In fact, the project that we have right now, the large project we have with Airbus, we did a lot of fandangling, I suppose, with our Canadian delegates to make sure that it would happen. We knew we were ideally positioned for it, but there was stiff competition. And so we did a lot of lobbying with our with CSA to make sure it would happen. If any small company, I know it's a lot easier for the Taluses and Airbuses of the world, but we don't have the European presence. The only way we can capitalize on opportunities is by our network, because we don't maintain a European office. The network is key. You start small and you grow from there, and don't be frustrated. I know for us, we spent 4 tenders to the Canadian Space Agency before we finally lucked out on a project. You got to be patient on these things. It takes that trust with the space agencies takes a lot longer time than the trust would be with, say, a private company. So patience is very key. Tenacity is very key.
Thank you very much, Des. So I'd just like to move on to the next and last panelist that we have on this, from Daniel Schulte from Airbus. Dan, I'd be interested in your perspective on EU collaborations. You're in a unique opportunity as well, where Airbus is just enormous on the European side of the pond. And your thoughts on where EU-Canadian collaboration could grow in the future and potentially how to get there.
Well, and Des already stole some of my thoughts here. Or in the end, we're all as engineers, and engineers trust each other by solving problems. Once they have solved the problem together, we tend to continue to work together on other projects. And having seen both sides of the Atlantic, I think on the Canadian side, we sometimes underestimate the diversity of the European space ecosystem. All the opportunities stimulated particularly by ESA to have study projects, technology development with large teams, with all kinds of contributors all across the continent. That creates a benefit of people working together, solving solutions together. And that's also a challenge, of course, for Canadian companies to participate in and to insert themselves into that. And this is one of the things that I see in my new role at Airbus, is something to work on finding the roles for Canadian companies on Airbus teams, and vice versa, where Airbus can help some of our Canadian partners to be successful as well. So, but it all starts with, as Des was mentioning, solving problems together, doing projects together, start small and grow from there.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Dan. So we do have maybe about 3 or 4 minutes here for questions and answers. If there may be any questions on thoughts on EU collaboration from the audience itself. We don't have any questions in the Q&A panel that I see. Delphine, you may have. Not sure.
So, Aaron, there is a question there in the chat that I wouldn't mind responding to.
Yes, please do, Des.
From sorry if I butcher the name, Francois Régis, who asks about what's the point. Let me respond by saying it's taken decades for us to establish a network, and it took quite some time, many years, to establish the good relationship that we have with Airbus, for example. We're on a variety of projects with Airbus right now. If we didn't have, so if we were to rely solely on primes to get our project work, we wouldn't be in business. So you can't just simply rely on the primes to lead the projects. There are large Canadian companies that can create innovation and respond to projects, and we are at a distinct disadvantage. We can work on Canadian projects. We're at a distinct disadvantage in working on European projects. So this venue of talking about how to deal with issues and how to properly collaborate is extremely important, because it allows us to grow our network and to grow our business.
Are there any comments on the differences between collaborating with the EU versus collaborating with the US, for example, where there's very different interests, either from a government perspective or commercially? Are there unique experiences in dealing with the EU on that side that anyone has experienced, or emphasis?
No takers, I'll take it.
Go ahead, Daniel.
I can take it too, but Daniel, you go ahead. You probably have more experience than I.
So I've seen, I think in my career, both sides. I think, putting on my Canadian hat, and I think actually the same goes for Europe. Actually, collaboration with the US is sometimes one way, and I feel, or I've seen, that the collaboration between Canada and the EU is much more a two-way stream. So that creates opportunities. That creates opportunities in the public sector. It creates opportunities that result into commercial endeavors as well. And I cannot go this session without mentioning RapidEye, which was the first commercial remote sensing constellation built by a Canadian European consortium, and on commercial terms. And Wade is building on that idea with Earth Daily. So I have not seen those opportunities with the US.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I do note that time is getting limited, and I do want to wish everyone a fantastic day, and thank you very much for your participation. Wade, Miguel, Chris, Desmond, Danielle, thank you very much for your insights and thoughts on this topic, as it is an important issue to tackle as companies want to grow, and we see everything becoming more and more global. And so, understanding how Canada can deal with the EU is a very important aspect as well. Also, thank you very much to Mike Mueller and to Olivier Lemaitre for your opening thoughts and comments on that. And with that, I'd like to just turn it over for any closing statements from Delphine, with the thanks to the EU Chamber of Commerce for putting this together.
Thank you very much, Aaron, and thank you to all the panelists here. I think it's the first time that actually you can really work on this topic, and I think it's very interesting. And I see there's a way for more collaboration again between the EU and Canada. So I'm sure we'll dig more into these topics in the coming month. To all the participants, also I wanted to thank you. We will have a report session published in the coming weeks, so you can sign up to UCAN newsletter directly on our website or follow us on our social media. And again, to all the panelists, thank you so much. It was really a short hour with so much information, but again, I'm sure we will have the opportunity to discuss more. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful day if you are in Canada, and have a wonderful evening if you are in Europe. Thank you, everyone.
Merci.
Merci.
You.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.